Tere hommikust! Mul on hea meel avada teaduri vaade kogukonna arengule või maaelu arengule järjekordne loeng. Ja ma ütlen alguses, et me räägime inglise keeles. Mõnes do you need translation for beginning? Et varsti me läheme üle inglise keele peale ja meil on küll tõlk, aga kuna see online tuleb meil ühes keeles, siis ma loodan, et ei pahanda, et me aga küsimused, kui võimalik, kasutame inglise keelt ja läheme edasi, et siis on natukene lihtsam sellega, et kuigi me oleme Eestimaal ja proovime eesti keelt ja meil on tõesti ka Johannale tuleb tõlge. Aga kindlasti võib ka eesti keelt kasutada, nii et selles mõttes ei ole. Nii, kui kellelgi on vaja veel kõrvaklappe, siis need on seal olemas. Kanal 1, seal on allkirja leht, mis on vajalik. Nüüd on uued rangemad korrad, et tuleb kindlasti ka suure saali seltskonnal käia läbi valvelauast. Ja see loeng läheb online ja pärast on ka järelvaadatav. Me teeme esimese osa üsna ühes jutis. Paaris kohas tuleb selline vahepaus, kus Johanna küsib küsimusi või tähendab, kus te saate küsida ka Johannalt täpsustavaid küsimusi. Siis meil tuleb väike paus, kus me sätime seda ruumi natukene ja kutsume juurde juba järgmised inimesed ja teeme sellise väikse paneelarutelu. Ja võib-olla siit võibki siis edasi minna, et my name is Ave Bremse. I'm coming from Estonian Network Unit. You can leave now your headset. And I ask, Johanna has interesting background. It's maybe better that you introduce yourself, your background, because you are British.
Yeah.
You live in Latvia.
Yeah.
You are a farmer in Latvia.
Yeah.
You are like rural development scientist, or how it's in better word to say. Okay. You are studying, and you are also studying and teaching in Estonia.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe about all these details. And you are active member of rural village movement?
No.
No,
well,
not yet.
Yeah,
okay.
I know them, yes.
So maybe my part will be here just to lead some questions. I know that time is always short, so we start immediately. Let's keep our question also short. And thank you for coming and sharing your experiences to us. So please, Johanna, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So just a brief biography. As Ava said, I'm living in Latvia, and I've been there for about 12 years. I was brought up in the UK, in the north part of the UK, so I always say there's a difference between the north and the south. It makes us a little bit more like Latvians and Estonians than it would if I came from the south of the UK, believe me. So I spent about 15 years in a village in the UK. It's what we would call a small village of about 1,000 people. That's not small for Latvia and Estonia, of course. And we grew up, I had my children there, and we grew up. And then, towards my late 30s, we moved. We moved to Denmark for 3 years. But I'd been coming to Latvia for 2 or 3 years, and we were doing English-speaking camps. So teaching children, and we loved it. So we moved to Denmark. It was my husband's job. He was a haematologist in a laboratory in a hospital in the UK. So we moved, and he spent 3 years with this particular Danish company. They then relocated him to Colorado. We spent 2 years there, and they consolidated the division that he was working in, sold it off to an American company. And it's at this point we were thinking, okay, our children have left home now. What do we do? So we moved to Latvia. And we had a little bit of money behind us, so we just kind of tried to see what we would do. And in doing that, I was thinking, well, I'd like to get back into studying again. What can I do? And I was looking around, and I found a course on development management. So I did that with the Open University online. It's a UK university. After a little while, I needed to expand that. I wanted to do a master's. And I found another course, Managing Sustainable Rural Development, with the University of the Highlands and Islands. And that was very interesting because there were some stark similarities between the Scottish experience of the English landlords determining what happens in the Scottish Highlands, and the people there did not have a great say. Very similar in some ways to the German barons in Estonia and Latvia determining the direction of the Estonian and Latvian people. So I gained my master's, and I was looking for a PhD place. Now the problem is with a lot of the academic literature, certainly from Latvia, very little was actually being written and published. But there was one gentleman who was doing that, but he was English. And I did a bit of search, as you do, and I found him online. And Simon Bell, who's had by then become a professor at the Estonian University of Life Sciences. So I contacted him, and we got to know each other. And when I finished my master's and I was looking for a PhD place, he said, well, why not come to Estonia? And that's how I ended up at the Estonian University of Life Sciences. So I've been doing my PhD for 7 years. The usual problem, trying to get papers published. I'm now at the stage I've done that. I've got my 3 papers. I can now write my thesis. So hopefully in the new year, I will finally get my PhD. But it's been an interesting time. In all that time, I've been living in Latvia, and we've been developing what we're doing. We got a piece of land, and it was like, oh, what shall we do? So we decided to get alpacas. Does anybody know what an alpaca is? I shall show you later if you don't. And so we became alpaca farmers. Oh, yes. Yes, you did. That was on there. So we became alpaca farmers. But it's very interesting in conferences being able to sit. I have my research hat on. And then there are times when people start talking about farmers and farming or rural areas, and they've obviously been sat in their, at their desks looking at statistics, or, you know, they've not been out very much. And there's something that's missing from what they're saying. And I can put my farmer's hat on and say, well, actually, in the rural areas, it's like this. So that's my background. There are a few other things as well, but we may go into that later on. So I have multiple identities. My passport says I'm British. And at the moment, that is very embarrassing. So I'm sorry about Brexit. I feel very European, which Theresa May decided was not a good thing, but I think it is. It gives me a different perspective on life. So yes, I have a British passport. I have British mannerisms, and I have British sense of humour. So there are things which are very distinctive from that perspective. But like I said, I'm also European. I feel very comfortable in different cultures, and I find it actually very fascinating. And I love those differences, from the very expressive sort of South European to the quieter, more thoughtful sometimes Northern Europeans. And I've even got to the stage now where people have stopped asking me, certainly in the north of Europe, in my own language. You know, people talk to me I've been in places they immediately talk to me in Finnish or Estonian and not immediately English, which they used to do. So I don't know what it is about me, but I've changed somewhere. So I also have gifts and skills that are not very British. I collect herbs, I can collect them from the fields. I know what they are. I can make teas, and I can pick mushrooms. Now that, for a British person, is complete shock and horror. You pick mushrooms, you could die. And it's, you know, whereas I've talked to people in Latvia, and it's like, you can have, if you pick mushrooms, it's okay, you're Latvian. If they would give me a Latvian citizenship because of that, I would be most pleased. Unfortunately, I haven't learnt the language. I haven't had much space in my head. I've been looking at the rural situations and studying, that I haven't had time to learn much of the language. I do know some very bizarre sort of things through my research, through talking to people like hunters and farmers. So, you know, wild animals and trees and things like that, I actually know in Latvian, or at least I can, if I hear them, I think I know what that is, which not everybody does who translates for me, which is a very funny situation. So I'm a little bit Estonian. I don't like small talk very much. I find it very difficult. And I was walking with some Finns fairly recently, and it's like, oh, as a British person, you think, really should be talking to, you know, some conversation. And I thought, it's okay, they're Finnish. I don't have to. Oh, thank goodness for that. Have you ever felt like that? But something connects me to the land in Latvia. What is it? What connects any of us to our land, to the places where we live? What connects you to where you live? I know the language of the seasons, and I know the language of the natural environment. I don't know very many Estonian words, just a few. Tere, I can do, and aita, I can do. Unfortunately, not much more, and in Latvian, a little bit more, well, more than that anyway. I won't starve. But I'm embedded in the land in Latvia, and you are embedded in where you are. Place attachment. It's such an important part of who we are and of our lives. It connects us to the place where we live. Now here you have these terms which get used very frequently. Sense of place, place identity, place attachment, place dependence, and different disciplines use them in different ways, and it can all get very confusing when you're trying to read the literature on these things. But what does it actually mean to you and to me? It's our sense of place that is important. Our sense of place in this world, our sense of place in our communities, a sense of place in where we live. So the sense of place is made up of different aspects. The place landscape identity, which shapes the identity of the place. It shapes who you are. Like, I am British. It shaped who I am, the way I think, and the people that you're surrounded by. Place attachment are the emotional bonds that you have to that place. The memories you have, the realizations you have, the people that are important to you. That is what you're attached to. And place dependence is where that area, that place that you are in, facilitates what you want to be in life, what you want to do. So I couldn't do what I'm doing in the UK because the land is far too expensive. So the place, I depend on Latvia to be an alpaca farmer, to be able to work online from the middle of nowhere. Because this is something that's actually, you cannot do everywhere. I was in Spain recently and Germany recently, and their internet coverage was not as good. And it was like, when I went on the train, you mean you have nowhere to plug your computer in? There's no Wi-Fi? What? I've got so used to it up here. Because I do travel by public transport where I can. And to come here, I've come up on the buses and the trains, and I've not come by plane. And that's the way I would rather it be. You know, I can do my work while I'm on the buses and the trains. Now, people in the rural areas, they are attached to the countryside. They're attached to the rural. They're attached to the peace, to the quiet, to the solitude sometimes. But conversely, they're also attached to community. They're not city people. That's usually how they define themselves. I'm not a city person. And this was common for both Latvians and Estonians. Rural lifestyles connect across boundaries, especially across Northern Europe. If you have similar sort of topography, similar climatic conditions, there's an understanding between rural people that you don't always get between the urban and the rural. I mean, my hands show you that I've been in the garden. And sometimes that is how you know that person is rural. You know, you sort of, unless they're very good and wear gloves, their hands usually show they've been in the gardens. So there can be huge variations, though, between communities. I mean, when I was doing my research, there are those communities that are working together, village organisations, that have really got people volunteering and working together. And then there are other places where they have got distinct problems between different sections of society. And that wasn't sort of like Estonia and Latvia is different. It was more each individual place. So when you're looking statistically at a place and you say, well, that's got the same resources as that place, they should be the same. No, we need to go deeper to that. We need to go down to village level to understand the differences in the villages. So in the cities, people are more connected to each other through their interests. In the rural areas, it's a place. So the cities are communities of interest. Rural places are communities of place. Place is far more important in rural areas. So my last paper, this was the diagram that I used, and it helps me to visualize how we are attached. Because it's multi-layered and it's complex, but it's also quite simple. So as we travel through life, we have anchors to place. We put down our anchors in the places that we live. They're at individual level. Each person has their own character, so they have their own way of connecting to somewhere. Your family will influence how you connect to somewhere. The community in which you grew up connects you and changes how you think about things. There are cultural aspects. And then there's the physical land itself, and that will be different for each person. There are memories, experiences, and realizations that all add anchors to a place. And when you move, you may have to consciously take up some of these anchors. into the community in which you live. You are moving on. Particularly with young people, this happens. But as you get older, maybe you've put down more anchors. It can be harder to pull them up. And when you move and you suddenly think, what's the problem? It's because you've got an anchor still in the place you've come from. But if people are moving constantly, because people are leaving Estonia, they're leaving Latvia, they're leaving rural places all over Europe. It's not just an Estonian or a Latvian problem, it's a European problem. It's a worldwide problem. People are leaving the rural areas. They're pulling up their anchors. They haven't got that attachment to the place. So what does it mean to be Estonian or Latvian? You will probably know better than me in that way, because that's you. But as an outsider, what does it look like? I mean, one of the things that is very striking is actually the density within Estonia and Latvia. People ask me, why don't you want to go back to the UK? Density is one reason. I actually enjoy being in the peace and the quiet. I'm not a city person, I'm a rural person. So Estonia, about 1.3 million people, 45,000 kilometres squared, and a density of 28 per kilometre squared, according to Wikipedia anyway. Latvia, 1.9 million, just about 65 kilometres squared, population density 34.3. England, now I make the distinction here because England is the most dense place, 424 people per kilometre squared. It's a huge increase. And when I go back, I feel so claustrophobic. So many people are close by. Even in Scotland, which is far less dense than England, it's 67.5. And I know that in, more people are in Riga and Peri-Riga area and Tallinn, so the density is even less. And there's less of a difference between the urban and rural inhabitants in Estonia and Latvia than in the UK. That's because the history is, to quote Hannes Palang, we're only now getting to the stage where 3 generations have been growing up in the city, in Estonia. In the UK, you're talking far more generations than that. Industrialisation came early to the UK, so we're talking from 1750s, 1800s. People have not had a connection to the natural environment. Is it any wonder some way that UK is in a mess that it is, with pollution and industrialisation? It's a problem. Because there is a connection with natural environment, it's easier to understand the rural areas, but there is still a growing divide. So one of the things which I think is very interesting is the attachment to meadows. It's fundamental to Estonian and Latvian culture. Your summer festivals are in the natural environment. The UK does not have, well, harvest festivals is the nearest you will come to any connection to the rural. And when you go to see them in the churches, if you do see a harvest festival, you'll see tins of food these days, not real food. I mean, okay, it's easier to give out and give away to people who need it when it's in tins because it'll last. But the connection has been lost, that this is food, not natural food. I think also the problem of a lot of people moving about has made a settlement identity. Now, settlement identity means connecting to a rural place. For me, it's the hills. I like the hills. Now, okay, a lot of Latvia is flat, so I wouldn't be quite as happy in a flat area, but I'm happy in the hilly areas. That's the settlement identity that I have. And if Latvians and Estonians are moving about so much through this migration, they can end up with a settlement identity. They either like the city, they like the rural, they like a type of place, not necessarily the place. So, this is a chance for you to put in what you think. So, a few of you, you've heard what I think. What do you think? What is it to be Estonian or Latvian, if you have an opinion? Yeah. Who's going to be brave?
Kas keegi tahab? Anybody wants to comment? I come with the microphone. Yeah, good.
Hi, my name is Kai Kalman. I'm from Ministry of Rural Affairs. Yesterday, I asked from my daughter what comes into their mind if I say to them rural life. And the little one, 6 years old daughter, said grandmother's cat. And the older one said also hills and wood. And I think this is what connects with our family. And I think to be Estonian, it is like the connection with the active and friendly community, the local community. I think that is to be to Estonian. That's why we have love these festivals and come together and so on. Mm-hmm. I think that. Thank you.
So here in the back, maybe you come here to be also online.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Rafael. I'm living countryside. And if I ask my sons what is about to be Estonians, etc., they will say that our grandmother lives in town, not in countryside. So I think if you think about why people living in countries, why they leave, go away from homes, the main reason I think is job. And I know some people, they don't like climate. There's some of Estonians don't, this November is very, very hot to be in Estonia, and they live in Spain or, I don't know, in Italy or whatever. So the main thing is actually what you can do in countryside, what kind of job you have there.
Maybe we... one more. Oh, okay.
Hello, my name is Are. I'm also the official of this ministry, but my background is rural sociology, and I would say that the Estonian as nation is a construction of a bit more than 200 years. And basically for me, this is related to the local identities of different counties and villages. And Estonia has more than 10 different regions where the place identity is different. And it is maybe worst thing. The second thing I would say that the old name of nation is maarahvas, rural people, and it has maybe the time dimension is more than 10,000 years. It's different native people in different regions with different identity. Coastline is different, and the South Estonia is very different. And South Estonia and North Latvia are quite similar. And the Estonian language is different dialects influence the Latvian language also in different ways. So that but the place identity is mostly related to the different geographical things, also soil, forests, and so on. And if we are talking about identities, there are more than 15 different elements in this identity. But Estonians, with song festivals and so on, it is quite young construction in social terms.
Well, thank you.
So maybe let's go on and you can comment these, what you heard.
Yes, I mean, that is very interesting and very helpful. Of course, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to look very much at the different places within Estonia. I've concentrated on merely 3 villages, but that in itself tells me there are differences between, and they can be very different. That's why I say you can look statistically at these places and they should be the same, but they're not. We have to go a bit deeper to find out what people value in each of these places, because it influences how they will react to whatever decisions are made about what happens in these places. So as you mentioned, living in a rural place, you have a mix of choices. And no matter how attached you are to a place, at the end of the day, you have to be able to afford to live there. Jobs are so important. And you see the pain of people who are forced to move because they feel there is no alternative. What do you do when you haven't got the money? I mean, in some ways, are able to live in Latvia because it's cheaper. And sometimes living in the rural areas is cheaper. And people have moved from the cities because they can't afford to live in the cities to the countryside because it's cheaper. They can grow their own vegetables, they can do that. But that is a lifestyle that they've been forced into as well, which isn't always very healthy. Like you're saying, the singing and the dancing, okay, you're saying that's a new thing, but the fundamental being part of the rural is a very interesting concept. As far as, yes, many places, that is the beginning. That is where people are rooted into their landscapes. And for Estonia and Latvia, it's been newer coming out of that, whereas I was saying in the UK, from 1800s, people were heading into the cities at that point. They were being moved off land. You had the huge clearances in Scotland where people were being moved off the land to make way for sheep. That's why you have a huge Scottish group in America. They were forced. And as you say, the meadows, the forests, the mushrooms, all very important to the festivals that keep the connection to place. The only thing I would say, it's a very minor detail. In Latvia, it's very easy to get my herb teas. In Estonia, I have now developed a coffee addiction. It's like, so that is one thing when you go into somebody in Latvia, I do tend to get the offer of tea or coffee. In Estonia, it seems to be coffee. I have to ask for tea, and yet you make teas and make really nice ones. So, but yeah, I do drink a lot more coffee these days. So there is a quality of life in the countryside. So we do have Obinica, and we have 2 pictures of our land in Latvia. I think that actually is some food from Poland, but I think the essential parts, it was definitely a very rural place. Good food. I sat in Germany at a dinner, and it was €75 for this dinner. because it was locally sourced, it was organic. And I was sat there thinking, and I can get this kind of food a lot in where I live. It's what we kind of eat sometimes, mostly, because my food is, if it's not organic, it's very close, because I can't get necessarily the actual like food for my chickens without spending a huge amount of money, but it's, you know, food that they get given and not granule type things. And I went to my friend who'd been ill, and we sat down to elk and local potatoes and local carrots. And, you know, this is the sort of thing. It was like, so this is a normal, well, it wasn't a normal meal. Okay, the hunter had just been. But the connection to good food is still in the communities. And my friends, my neighbours, there was somebody selling some meat, and it was in the back of a car. Now, I don't know the legalities of it, I have to say, but in the UK, it would be, oh my goodness, you can't do that. That is really bad. But my friends were, my neighbours were like, well, we know her. We know what those pigs are being fed on. It's good meat. It's really nice. And so they were buying it. And it was important that they were connected to the person who was selling that meat. There are places here where, you know, okay, so you may not be living in the countryside, but you know who does, and you can go and get your apples, your carrots, your potatoes, and you know where they've come from, how they've been grown. And in the villages, you can't, in summer, you can't get decent fruit and vegetables. Why? Well, either they're growing their own or they know who does. In the UK, you can't get decent fruit and vegetables in the local supermarkets, if there is even a supermarket in the village, which there often isn't, because everybody goes and shops at the supermarket. The farmers shop at the supermarket, the villagers shop at the supermarkets. They don't have a connection to people who grow their own food. I'm unusual. I grow my own food. My parents still, yes, they do still grow their own food. My grandparents grew their own food. You have to go back even further than that in the UK to have that experience, to have that knowledge. Great quality of life in Estonia and Latvia in the rural areas, from the point of view of how you can access great food, live in a lovely environment that has not been contaminated by a great amount of chemicals. Okay, there are still some industrial agriculture, and there is a lot, though, still natural environments. However, as been mentioned, it's not sufficient to overcome the obstacles that hamper rural livelihoods, such as restricted market access. How do you get that produce from your fields to the cities? And the amount of income you can actually even earn from that. Our producers are not earning a huge income. The cities the rural areas are subsidising city life. When the rural people cannot afford their livelihood to live in the countryside, they are subsidising the cities. So one of the aspects that is similar is the amalgamations of municipalities in Latvia and Estonia. But one thing that I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but an improvement in the Estonian way of doing this is that something like, you have the free buses. It's not perfect to get you to the cities or the main municipality to do whatever administrative things you need to do if you haven't got internet access. It's not great, but it's better than not even providing it and still amalgamating these things. At least there is some thought about the rural. And there is the internet access. From my understanding, internet access is better in Estonia than Latvia. And being able to access administration is easier than in Latvia. Accessing the admin for inputting just the data on our animals, we usually use somebody else because our language is not adequate. Now, if it was easy to navigate, it would be fairly simple to show me how you do it and we will work it out. But it's not. Even our friends are like, I think you click that. No, that's not right. I think it must be this then. And it's a very tortuous method of trying to just input data. And these are, our friend, one of my friends is she's doing her own masters, and she still can't quite work out, well, I think it's this one. Oh, yes, that's right. And then if you input it wrong anyway, then you get fined. And I know there is a problem with bureaucracy here. If you want to get money, I know people who will not do that because, well, you have to have every single cent correct or you get fined. That's the impression, whether that's the case, but that's certainly the impression. That's how people feel about actually accessing money. So they won't do it. And that is very much a key in Latvia. That mistrust of the authorities, that they will be fined if they get anything wrong, even the littlest detail. I was in Spain at the European Rural Parliament, and we went on the usual tours. And the leader projects there actually said they're taking a different approach, and this was very interesting. They have they developed more of a relationship with the people, and they sit down, okay, we work out a plan of what you're going to do. Here's your money. Here's an instalment. You get the money. You go away for a year. You come back. They will have filed their taxes, so they sort of assume that then everything is okay with the money, as in you're doing things correctly. But are you making progress? Have you made a progress with that money? Is it working? Not, have you got this receipt, that receipt, this receipt? Is this all tallied in with this? No, is it successful? Is it working? Are you progressing? Yes? Good. Here's another instalment. Come back in another year's time. Are you progressing? Are you making progress? Again, not all this paperwork on top of the paperwork you have already sent to the tax office, or the legal things that you are supposed to do as a farmer, employer, business, whatever. Trusted relationships, very important. And I think there is more trust in Estonia than there is in Latvia, but it is still sad that somebody like me, from the outside, just because I'm from the outside, can be more trusted than between people within the country. Now, I'm encouraged to hear that, that is a feature of village life, that people do trust, and there are those trusted relationships. But across groups, does that still happen? Is it just a small group that they are trusted? Or does trust stretch across further? Trust is so important. Trust reduces bureaucracy. Trust reduces the cost. And certainly in Latvia, we are very much more trusted than between even neighbours, which is sad. And isolation. It's a huge, huge problem. No. This is a quote from a resident in Obanica. But But what makes me sad is that there are people who used to. You could see back then, when you looked out of a window, there were lights on in neighbouring households, and someone was in there. But now, there is silence. You don't hear the cows anymore, and that's sad. That's a problem in your rural areas when people are leaving. You're losing your social connections to other people. I remember sort of like so busy, doing my research, doing this, doing that, visiting here, visiting there. And then there was one point, and I suddenly almost like looked up and thought, where's everybody gone? The people I had actually made contacts with, good friendships with. One had gone to Germany. Another one had had a marital breakdown and moved villages. My other friend is still there, but she's also really busy because she's been developing her own business. She's a goat farmer, makes cheese, becoming very popular. These are people that I've invested in and made friends with, but just suddenly they're gone. And if you magnify that over the years, as people have drifted out of those villages, there's such isolation. And what are we left with in the villages? There's low quality, low rewards. Tourism is it's the thing to do, isn't it? If you need to diversify, you get into tourism. But what are the rewards in those jobs? How much money actually comes back to the people and can be used in the village? How much do people actually get out of this? Then there's the mental health and the alcohol addiction. There's so many people who are drunk in the village. And part of the problems are the seasonality of that employment. How long can you have a tourist season if you only have a certain number of good days? I mean, okay, you have winter activities as well, but you have got these issues of the seasonality of that employment and the shorter seasons here. Reliability of people. Now, okay, you've got these mental health issues, you've got these alcohol issues, and you've got the people who are reliable, could be reliable, are the ones that are too busy. Where do you find your workers to help you over those really busy periods of time? And then, of course, the weather. As you said, November's is pretty grim. And it has been pretty grim. I've been away a lot and came back and my husband was rather depressed because of the rain. It hadn't been able to get on with anything, hadn't been able to do anything, and it was just wet, it was miserable, can't get the tractor out, can't clean the alpacas out because it needs a tractor and he doesn't like making a lot of mess. So, yes, what do you do about the miserable times? What do you do in the miserable times? So, while we have a break, I'd just like you to think of what are the local challenges. What are the things that you have to, you think are the most important challenges in the rural areas? But I think we'll have a break. I need to.
So, what are the local challenges? Do you have any thoughts? I can come to you with the microphone. Yes, so you have lots of ideas. Use it, of course.
Hello, again Mikai from the Ministry of Rural Affairs. I think the outmigration on some point isn't the problem, but the big bigger problem is that the small number of people who come back. It's okay to go away for a while and to study and get educated, but you have to have some connections and you have to have some motivation to come back. Mm-hmm. That is the big point. Some years ago we made a survey and asked people what are the things that motivate you to come back to rural area. The first thing was the environment, the quiet, the closeness, the nature closeness. Mm-hmm. In real life, it is in rural area. The second motivational thing was they wanted to have a good job, well-paid job, a diverse job opportunity. And the third motivational thing was community. They wanted that in the rural place the community is friendly and active and strong, and also they wanted to see that there is young leaders there. But if we did a reality check, the main obstacle was that there is no well-paid jobs. There is no diverse job opportunities. The second obstacle was transportation, to poor road connectivity. And the third obstacle was services, poor services availability. And this is, I think, the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you for these comments. Maybe one comment more. My comment is, maybe it's not too big to discuss, maybe to panel, that seems that sometimes we're talking a lot about the jobs in countryside, but very soon we also will talk about the price of land to be able to live in countryside. It's not maybe issue here, but if you comparing your UK experiences here. So please, your comments.
Okay. As I mentioned, I've been to the European Rural Parliament in Spain. And before you think, well, that's great, it rained there too. Did you know that on the north coast, the rain comes in off the Atlantic, hits the mountains? Asturias is not the place to be in November. I have never been so wet in a long time. But anyway. But that's where I've been I was there for a week, or just less than a week. And this, I'm going to go very briefly through the People's Declaration. So some of these things, these are what rural people in Europe are saying. So it's not just Estonia, it's not just Latvia, this is the whole of Europe. And you'll see some of the things are the same. Demand that rural is considered equal to urban in minds and practice. How does that work out? If you do it on a cost basis per person, that is not going to work because there's so few people in the rural areas. Expect the right to choose where we live and work. If there are no jobs, we don't get a choice. It's simple. Call on the governments to recognise and appreciate the value of rural volunteering, community life, entrepreneurship and natural resources. I was asked yesterday, I was talking to some master's students, they were an international group, but they were from the London South Bank University, and one of them asked me about woofing in Latvia and Estonia. I don't know about Estonia, I don't know if anybody has got experience of that, but the only times I've heard about it in Latvia is, again, this kind of suspicion. The authorities are suspicious when people come and work for nothing. You don't volunteer. You know, volunteering is not a big thing. It's becoming more common, but to go from one country to another, aren't you being paid somewhere? Are you being paid under the table, as we say? So black work. Is that the case? Is this corruption? Or is it true volunteering. And what is volunteering? Why would you volunteer? I think that's kind of the attitude that seems to come across. So where a lot of people in other countries sometimes even depend on these woofers, the volunteers who come and work on the farm for, you know, maybe 4 hours a day, and then the rest of the time they get to enjoy the countryside. It's a good, you know, it's a good way of getting around Europe for younger people and getting different experiences. But if it's treated with suspicion, then it's a problem. And one other possible problem with that is how do the people actually in the rural areas accommodate these from different cultures? Do they understand people from the different cultures enough to be able to tolerate the differences? And if the populace are rising in the rural areas, does that mean there's actually an intolerance of other cultures in rural areas? It's a question we have to ask. How can we accommodate these people? Because sometimes they're bringing in sometimes just physical ability, sometimes actual knowledge. And it can be an enriching experience for the children in the villages to meet. You know, you don't have to go to a different country to see the culture. They can come to you. So ask politicians to accept rural people, communities, entrepreneurs and municipalities as partners. That's a big thing. It sounds quite easy, but as partners, what does it mean to be a partner? It's an equal relationship. If it's not an equal relationship and the cities feel that they are doing something for the rural areas, you've got a problem. You're not being treated as an equal. And self-esteem in the rural places compounds that problem, makes it worse. Because if you do not feel equal, you know, you are afraid. You will not then be able to stand as a partner and work together with the authorities. And they request that the voice of rural people is heard in policy and consultative processes. So again, that's about self-esteem, about partnering, about being treated as equals. So quality of life, insist poverty and social exclusion are addressed. One of the problems is that the resources are moving away. Ask governments and decision makers to ensure that services are as close as possible to rural people to avoid security risks and loss of time and money. So yes, buses to the municipality to make it easier for people to go and see people in administration for whatever reason is good, but it's not close enough. It takes time, it takes money to get there. And the people are ready to contribute with local service solutions and economic initiatives. Now this, I think, is a little bit maybe more from the European wide aspect, because people are more used to contributing and, you know, coming up with local initiatives. It's improving, I think, in Estonia and Latvia. It's getting there, but there's still, you know, how do you actually overcome these issues? How do you work these things out when you're used to having them provided for you? Policy, programming and financing. Welcome a real rural development policy for villages, communities and small towns. I was talking earlier with the, about rural proofing. And this is so important. How do you make that a key part of policy? How do you ensure that people are included in that process? And one of the things that, my actual topic, which I didn't say, sorry, is mainstreaming participatory development in rural Latvia and Estonia. It's bringing participatory development into the middle of policy making. That's the aim of what I would like to do. But first of all, before you can do that, you need to find out what the values are of people in the rural areas. Not assume them, not look at it on paper, not look at it statistically, but actually find out what it is that people value in those rural areas. Because if you don't, and you start messing around with something, you will soon find out what they value, because that's when the complaints come. And it's more costly to deal with the problems afterwards than it is to go and talk to the people first. Support smart, community-friendly initiatives and programs like LEADER, CLLD and Erasmus, but demand that the regulation and administration of these programs is simplified. Bureaucracy. I mean, that's a problem across Europe, not just in Latvia, not just Estonia. I don't think the history of the authoritarianism is still working its way out of the system. It's a problem. But you have also that attitude in Denmark and Sweden too, where, you know, we know what's best, we tell you what to do, you do this. And it takes time to work out of the system. But less bureaucracy would be easier. But to do that, you do need trust. How do we build trust? Require flexible working conditions and opportunities with effective support systems. In the urban areas, you work to an urban schedule, in the UK it's 9 till 5. You have holidays or vacations, and, you know, there's sort of vacations of July, August time, whatever. In the rural areas, you're not working to the same schedule. You're working to seasons, and seasons vary, they get more chaotic. You have to work to that. I work on an EU project, health and well-being in the Baltic Sea. This is what pays my money. It's actually gathering the literature together of evidence of health and well-being and how the Baltic Sea affects that. But I had to say, there is 1 week in the summer when I will be able to read emails, I can reply to emails, but I will not be able to work. I don't know when that will be. It depends on the weather. Fortunately, they all understood, or at least the leader of the group understood. That was haymaking time, the most important week of the year when I have to get my hay in, along with my husband sort of thing. We have to get that hay in for the winter. If you don't get the hay in, it's expensive to go and buy it somewhere. So when that is, well, we've done it as early as mid-June, and we've still been doing it in August. Depends on the weather. I cannot say, this is the week we're going to do it. But in an urban environment, you can say that. This is the week when we go on holiday. This is the week I will not be there. No, it could be this week, it could be that week. How do you actually have a flexible working conditions with these higher paid jobs if you're also trying to work this into rural livelihoods? It's especially important with diversification of farming. I'm a diversified farmer, and it's difficult. It's hard work. And there are times I'm absolutely and utterly exhausted. How do you continue working? So ask for real, meaningful and engaging civil society participation in designing and delivering European programmes. Meeting the people. Working together. Encourage and support all forms of cooperation between local actors, including contractual solutions, project-based activities, and multi-level partnerships of public, private, and civil society actors. How do you promote cooperation? How do you build cooperation? Not just in the villages, but between groups. And this is very key, especially in Latvia and Estonia, when there is this lack of trust. In some places there is more trust, but they don't always work well between groups. We lived in Denmark for 3 years. They are very, very good at group work. They come up through their schools as a group. They don't go off into different subject areas like they do in the UK. So I noticed this difference between Denmark and the UK was this ability to work within the group was very, very strong. Between the groups was not as good. So there are different problems of how do you strengthen the groups, but also strengthen the ability to work outside of that group and network. Want to cooperate with local established structures and stakeholders, including leader groups, village community, NGOs, development partnerships, and local authorities. So again, it's just about demanding the working as partners, as equal partners. So reflection, what are the priorities for the rural areas? We talked about transportation. Maybe you've got some more ideas as well?
Hello. What are the priorities for rural areas? Maybe some quick reaction from somebody here. Again? Okay, but why not? Kai, we love to hear you.
You have to hear me today. Like Joanna said, it's important to understand and recognize rurality. I also believe the priority for rural area is that the voice of rural people must be heard in policy making. That's why the rural proofing is so important. It's the attempt to assure that all policy fields take rural issues into consideration, and I think this is the priority and this is the way we should go. Thank you.
So, one more. Actually, time is pressing us already, so let's let them go on. I have my questions too, but I keep myself. Thank you.
And if you didn't know what alpacas were, there are 3 of our boys. They are very cute. So yes, listen to me. And that is very fundamental. Urban people can think that they are listening to the rural people when they go and talk, but sometimes the understandings are so very different. Like I said, urban schedules. When you're talking to a rural person and you're saying, so when do you do this? And it'll be, oh, well, we'll do this in spring. Yeah, but when do you do that? Well, and sometimes a rural person will actually make something up. A friend of mine was asked, how many hours do you work? Does that make sense for a farmer? Not really. It's like, well, you work while you're on the farm. You're there 364 days of the year, more or less. I mean, okay, some people do manage to get away. And you're working all the time, or your time varies as to what you're actually doing. And she said, oh, you can't put that. So how long can you work? I think it was 40 hours a week or 40, whatever it was. She said, okay, that's what I work. So that has gone down on some paperwork somewhere that this farmer works 40 hours a week. How many of you know farmers who work 40 hours a week? It doesn't fit in the box. If it doesn't fit in the urban box, it doesn't get measured. So inhabitants feel unheard as resources are restricted or too bureaucratic to access. Sustainable rural futures require conditions where inhabitants feel listened to and responsive to their needs. An activist in one local Estonian village felt that her villagers was kind of a swear word for the authorities. She felt very protective of the village and its inhabitants. This is my village. These are my people. This is what I feel. She wasn't being listened to. We actually have to talk to the people, really talk to them, not just send them surveys, although they are valuable in themselves, but actually talk to them, walk their land with them. Asking the kinds of questions that match our own priorities is not going to get the right answers. We have to find out what their priorities are. Either that or we can end up talking across each other, not actually listening to each other properly. Pictures of rural realities cannot be observed purely from statistics, valuable though they are, and similar access to resources does not mean that everybody is going to relate to them in the same way. They're not going to reach similar outcomes. Not all of them have a similar ability to develop with the same resources. And this is why we need to connect in meaningful ways. There are multiple ways of connecting with villagers to find out what life is like. However, direct contact is necessary. So, this is taken from the UN Habitat Report. There are many issues on which urban and rural areas can find common cause, from human migration to agriculture to the flow of consumer goods. More integrated regional planning efforts can lead to better disaster prevention and response efforts, wider access to healthy food, comprehensive environmental protection strategies, and more. Yet, municipal planning and development can be short-sighted. Urban visions often fail to encompass adjacent rural areas that may lack the basic public services, exactly what we've been saying, and access to schools and medical facilities. The authors contend that this is a mistake because urban and rural spaces are inextricably linked, economically, socially, and environmentally. They are linked. Their needs cannot be adequately dealt with in isolation from one another. To improve the urban-rural synergies and reduce the external pressures, local, regional, and national governments must craft policy frameworks that outline common objectives for communities that comprise the metropolitan areas. The process should be participatory, as partners, highlight best practices, go and find out what really does work, and encourage investment and innovation. Rural people often feel neglected, and time again, the plight of rural schools and lack of medical facilities were mentioned as key issues in these areas. In Latvia and Estonia, it was schools. People will not, if there's a European funding to put young farmers back into the countryside because farmers are getting older and older. So we need young people moving back in. But there's no school. Where are their children going to be educated? Homeschool? Some are doing that. You know, they have those kinds of ideals. But generally speaking, they need somewhere for their children to go. And the medical care to look after them. Accidents happen in rural areas. Where are they going to go? Sickness, illness, where are they going to go? Do they have to go to the local municipality centre, which may be quite a while away, and takes time? So on the one hand, the EU is putting money in for this, but the actual circumstances for these young people to live in is deteriorating and carrying on deteriorating. So planning needs to get past the view of rural land as just production or recreation. I was sat in a group of urban ecologists, and it suddenly struck me that these people only really thought of the rural areas in terms of agricultural production and the availability as a recreational playground for the city. Where were the people in this? Where is the thought of how you put a social environment around those people who are producing the city's food, who are providing that recreation? They need a social environment. They need the social entities in which these things happen. So what are the main external challenges facing rural areas here in Estonia and in Latvia? So we'll actually move on from that because we kind of covered that. But how do we change? I mean, there are strategies we can take. There are policies we can take. But maybe it's actually mindsets we need to change. I don't know how familiar you are with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but so we've got food, shelter, sleep, water, air, basic necessities of life. And then you need safety. Then love and belonging, esteem, and then eventually the power to, that self-actualization, the power to be the best that you can. What does that look like in the urban area? Because the food is coming from where? Rural areas. If it's not rural Estonia, it's rural somewhere. Water, clean water, often comes from the rural areas. The clean air, rural areas, purifying the air. Flood risks is often a problem that starts off in a rural area. But what do we need to make it sustainable in the urban areas? In the rural areas, there may be the availability of food. In the UK, farmers cannot access good food, so, as I mentioned earlier. But you can access it in Estonia and Latvia. But how do you have love and belonging if you're in isolation? If there's nobody there, who do you belong to? Esteem. Farmers are this, farmers are that. They're not doing it right. They're not doing the things that we want them to do. They're contaminating our food. They're doing this. Sometimes the farming community are feeling very under pressure. I don't know, in some respects, what that attitude is like here. Maybe you have a better view of your farmers. In Latvia, it depends. But in the UK, it's much further down. There is so little connection with farming that people think that farmers are just almost... You would think sometimes that they're just evil. They don't do anything right. They pollute our land. They torture the animals, etc. Esteem is very low in the UK. In fact, the suicide rate of the farming community is higher than in the rest of the population. So what does it take to make that aspect of rural life sustainable? Because it needs addressing, because people are still leaving. There are place-based approaches. And place-based approaches can untap that local potential, stimulate sustainable development, and create significant well-being. But rural communities have difficulties capitalising on them due to unfavourable demographics. They're getting older. They're moving away. And the focus just on traditional industries as a diversification. When there's a lack of technical knowledge in the rural areas. So I'll just briefly go through these. These are some of the aspects that I've been looking at just lately. A reappreciation of the rural areas. Reappreciating the value of the natural environment. Creating new memories in rural areas that help to anchor people into place. Something more important in Estonia and Latvia than the UK is definitely the freedom to celebrate your own traditions. This is something that in some ways, certainly in England, has not been known since 1066. They've not been invaded or anything since then. There is regrounding of that appreciation back into the landscape. What does it mean to appreciate it? How can we give hope that actually impacts the physical landscape in a positive way? How do we develop new traditions? Is it okay to develop new traditions? Or should we be holding on to the old traditions in case they die out? Or can we do both? What are we teaching the next generation? If we lose some of these traditional ways of doing things, we will lose the knowledge that happens with these traditions within that context. And maybe they'll be valuable in the future. And they're valuable now as a connection to the past, as a connection to who we are, as a connection to the landscape. And that repositions those traditions and those practices, and also helps to develop on from there. It's not just we develop all these old things and we keep these old things. How do we use this knowledge? How do we reinvigorate the rural areas? In one place in Latvia, a little place called Kaldabrunja, they have a very creative way of looking at things. These key rings are made from glass from old buildings, abandoned buildings. But they've been used to create something new. They've used the abandoned places to create something new. And that has built self-esteem within the village, because that's also a story maybe of what we are doing. We are taking the old and abandoned places, creating something new, and making, of giving a new vision, a new start, a new way ahead. But of course, we're still struggling with external threats. Fortunately for me, these little creatures, or big creatures, wild boar, are no longer as much of a problem. But it's a problem for, of course, the domestic pig industry. But for me personally, we were very pleased not to see such a big problem. I actually did my master's on looking at the conflict over managing these, because the farmers and the hunters obviously have got different priorities in this. And they were struggling to work out how to manage when 60 to 70% of some of the land in our area was actually dug up with wild boar. It was such a hot spot of activity. So external threats, how did the farmers manage with this? They weren't allowed to deal with it on their own. They had to, because of the way that hunting works in Latvia, which I believe is different in Estonia, they couldn't actually deal with this on their own. They had to use the hunters. They had to be part of an organisation or use the organisation. And that was the only way they could deal with it. If the organisation wasn't interested in their farm, or they couldn't work together, they couldn't deal with the wild boar. We need regeneration We need inclusive and well-networked leaders. If the leaders are working together within a group but are not networking, it isn't helpful, it isn't healthy. People need each other, they need different groups, they need different inputs to keep it alive and moving on. They need hope. They need hope. And they need resources. And this is where the urban is so crucial. But urban areas need to understand they are not resilient unless the rural areas are thriving. This isn't about, oh, the poor rural areas, we need more money, we need more resources, we need. No, you, the cities, are vulnerable to climate change, to external threats, to sustainability, unless your rural areas are thriving and supporting that sustainability. They need the rural areas. You need the rural areas not just to provide, but to be thriving, to continue to provide. So adaptable resourcing. How and when are resources needed? When can resources be met by rural inhabitants with flexible governance? Flexibility. We need flexibility. Connecting urban inhabitants with rural inhabitants. We often talk about recreation, getting the urban people out. In my department, I'm part of the landscape architecture department. I'm not a landscape architect, but it's really interesting to see the landscape according to a landscape architect. I'm starting to read the landscape in a different way. But we talk about recreation, going out. The people need these green spaces. That's what my colleagues talk about. We need blue spaces, lakes, ponds, rivers, seas. We need the green spaces, the fields. Even in the city, they need green spaces because it makes the people in the urban areas less stressed. These are actual facts. Get them out into the countryside and experiencing this. This helps. But they're still just tourists. They're not really experiencing rural life. They don't understand rural life. Instead of taking the rural children and putting them in urban schools, how about putting urban children in rural schools sometimes, at least for part of the time? They need to understand rural. They need to understand natural lifestyles, natural environments. They need to understand the rural lifestyle. And I think so we need to build a better future together. I'll actually skip on to the... because we've covered most of it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jonna. We will go now to break, and then we gather here together with this panel discussion. Our interpreter needs also at least 50 minutes. There will be no fresh coffee or it will be all, Esther, yes. So we have how to say, modest, just get your coffee, tea, have a chat, and we come here after 15 minutes. It's okay, I'm looking towards interpreter, it's 15 minutes, okay. So, and we reorganizing the room. So it's end of first session. Thank you for listening. Tere ja jätkame peale väikest hingetõmmet. Mul on väga hea meel ja selle mõtte tõi meile siis Maaeluministeeriumi Maamajanduse ja konkurentsipoliitika büroo seltskond, et räägime ka paneelis. So, I'm happy that we will try also this kind of small form, like panel discussion, and now I shortly introduce, maybe we should have label what we don't have, but in this order here, we have not this same particular order, but Joanna is here. Then we have here Rivo Noorgõiv from Geovedia. Then we have Triin Kallas, but she is here, like Estonian Leader Union General Secretary or Executive Secretary, but behind this she's actually have a degree in philosophy, and she also, after many years working at university, moved to countryside, so you are like a little bit soulmates. Then we have Kaire Luht from Ministry of Finances. You can introduce your specific task there anyway. And we have Kai Kalman from Ministry of Agriculture. And indeed, maybe short introduction round of yourself, and next round, maybe we start even with here Rivo, is my question again also that if you read the title of this lection, what was your first thoughts, and maybe what was also the first thing came into your mind, what you wanted to tell us or speak. So for introduction, maybe, but not too long.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, and it was very emotional in my side. And if I can explain about the title, should I stay or should I go? Then my question, where to go? Our planet is only one planet, and in this case, to make description about the rural life, in my mind, is two ways. One is to describe through the conflict between rural area and urban area, or other to find the common solution, I mean through the network. And my position on theoretical way also to find the network between urban and rural life. And in this case, both of lifestyles are changing. And I don't want to stay on the very traditional way, but as you explained, you explained that in the countryside people are drinking, and in urban areas they are also drinking. And if my experience is, I can't say that these drunkards are now tied. From the Soviet time, now they disappeared. And in this case, I don't want to stigmatize the rural life. It's my most expression.
If you ask about the first impression, since it was a song title, Should I Stay or Should I Go, my first association was with ABBA and Money, Money, Money. And that is because we talk about living in the countryside a lot. We even had a special day in September that promoted living in the countryside. But the real question is about surviving there or working in the countryside or making your living there. Because it's easy to just move away from the town and go to the work every day, which makes your days much longer and tiresome. But I think the real rural life is about making your living there.
Maybe Triin, a couple of words about yourself. What are you doing for introduction as well? At the moment you are rural entrepreneur.
Yes, I have always felt deprived of countryside because I grew up in Tallinn in the block area of Mustamäe, and everybody around me went to their granny for the summer. And I had said when I was very, very young to my mother that why don't we have a countryside? Why don't we have a granny? Because my granny was in Tallinn. But I never saw it as an option because I worked in the university and it was in Tallinn or Tartu in Estonia context, and I also went abroad. But then at some point, maybe you can call it a midlife crisis, I realized that I have only one life and I need to do something with it. And if I don't try it now, I will never. So I moved away, although I had been living also close to Tallinn in Harjumaa, where I had to, go 20 kilometers and sit in the traffic jams every day. That was not it. I think when you want to have a different life, you have to be away from Tallinn more than 100 kilometers. So I live now almost in Latvia. I came here today 3 hours, and the density of population is 2 to 4 persons per square kilometer, so there is nobody there really. And what we do is tourism. We have a little holiday village. No agriculture for me. Village.
Which village? Name of the village?
Vango Imedemaa, Vango Holiday Village.
Vango Holiday Village. So, Kaire, please, maybe a couple words of introduction, as much as you like, and also your thoughts about the titles, if you saw it, what your first ideas to share us.
For the background, I wouldn't start with where I work and what I do, but I would also start with where I grew up. It was also a small countryside place, and I looked up the population densities also. It's under 3 person per square kilometer, so it was a very good place to grow up for an introvert. But it was a small place. I still visit. My family lives there. I have a connection to this place even now. For quite a while now, I live in Tallinn. I work in the Ministry of Finance, Regional Development Department. So we are kind of running or in charge for all of this regional development policy making and also different policy measures. For this title, I think it's quite an interesting topic to stay or go. And I think it kind of seems that there are a lot of people in Estonia who live in a place where they actually, for some reason, don't want to live. And it might be people living in rural areas who would actually want to move, but for one reason or another, they're not able to. Maybe they can't afford, maybe there are other reasons, and there are also people living in cities or towns who maybe would want to live in some other place, but for some reason they don't. So it's quite interesting if more people could be able to live in the place where they want to live, and also if they could do the job or do the work that they would want to do, and if you can combine the work that you want to do with the life you want to live.
Thank you. Kai, maybe also a couple of words of introduction and your thoughts, and first about these titles.
Yes, hello again. My name is Kai. I'm the head of Rural Economy and Competition Policy Unit. We are dealing with also community-led local development measures, also with rural economy diversification, investment measures, also financial instruments, regional programs, that kind of EU policy measures. First thought when I think about place attachment in rural life, in my mind popped out like a cottage, a nice farm, a house. besides my daughter's cats and wood and hills. But place attachment in rural life, if you think about the Ministry of Rural Affairs activity fields, then the Estonian important parts of Estonian identity is agriculture, food production, food culture, rural life, and also fishing. And that is these things that we have to be open to new things, and we also have to preserve the heritage, and if we want that rural areas are if you want to develop rural areas, if you want that they are led by strong active communities, and where also are young leaders there, we have to think how we can add value to the rural area, how can we add value to the products, how can we market and export them, and also we have to think how to build up cooperation between these communities, different level communities. Also, we have to support cooperation and collaboration between public, private, and civil society, and municipality and entrepreneurs. And that's why, if we talk about place attachment and community-led local development, it is a very important topic for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Jana, we was talking about a little, you gave us overview also, some thoughts about UK and Latvia. Of course, it was very, very little, and there was surprising thoughts still every time. And I was thinking about we organizing Open Farm Day, and I think that partly this this is not originally Estonian idea. This came actually from maybe it came directly from Finland, from Ireland, but I saw also this kind of days in UK and in New Zealand. If you Google a little bit. What kind of open farm days could be in UK, and how many people can go there, or very short vision about it? Because maybe we have this couple films that everything is very, very rural and very idyllic in UK.
The open days, as far as I would be aware, are much more livestock orientated, and because the agriculture is very divided. You're either a livestock farmer or you're an arable farmer, and they would tend to be, the open days would be to livestock because they're cute and they're cuddly, and some ways maybe not actually giving a realistic idea of what a farm is. Because it's aimed at just bringing tourists in, rather than actually displaying what a farm is. That's from what I've seen. I mean, maybe there are some good examples that I haven't, because obviously I've been doing my research since I got to Latvia as well, which I lived in the village, but I wasn't actually researching while in the UK.
Next question around is place attachment and Joanna's lecture. Is there anything new about it, and what it's matching your thoughts? Again, Rivo.
I think it's very important to discuss about the place-based development. And as you mentioned in your lecture, it's connected with identity. But if you can see the real life, people moving, no, I can't say every day, principally every day also, I mean between job and living place. And in this case, it's very difficult how to keep such place-based identity. And if you have many good practice for this, it's very important to keep it also in mind. And other way is if I can see through my work everyday rural life, there is very difficult to keep as a community together because there is many target groups, different interests, and if you are out of your residential area in rural life, I mean, you can come on the weekend, then you want to enjoy the life, quiet life more, and it's very, very difficult to get them together. And my question was, what is the community in our time? How you can define the community, a rural community?
Yeah, I pick up from here actually. I think the presentation came to the community idea, but we need to elaborate from here. During your speech, I was constantly thinking that is it fair to contrast urban lifestyle with rural lifestyle as opposites? Because I know many people in town as well who work more than 40 hours a week, and most people work too much, actually. And you would certainly find persons who would also say in an interview that I'm not a rural person, I need to live in the town. So what? One is not worse than the other, one is not better than the other. We need to complement each other, and the point is actually the community. What makes you attached to the place is not the scenery or the natural resources there, but the people. So I'm very glad that during the end of the presentation you came to that, but now I think it's the point we go further.
I guess also what we have to consider is that people identify on different layers. Like they identify themselves as Estonians, and maybe they say, I'm from the islands, or I'm from the southern part of Estonia, and then they say, well, I'm from Võrumaa. Maybe they say that, not all of them. But then they go smaller and smaller to their very own community, and so there are places that are with very different size. So they kind of, I think the identity for these people and this place attachment, it can also be kind of layered, if I'm right. So you can have, and maybe on this community level, you have to have this personal ties, you have to have this, like the same connection. Maybe at a bit higher level, you can have this, some other ingredients that kind of make up this identity or this feeling of belonging to this place.
I think the place tradition is very important. For example, I believe that I'm from Viljandi, and I believe I'm a mulk, and this tradition for me and this history for me is important. When we talk about community, I think the first community most important is family. Then we look further, then is like neighbors. Then it's a small village, the municipality, then services. This is all community, I think. Then also, and so on, entrepreneurs. This all is a big community, big collaboration, and so on. But if we want that people connect with rural area, then we also must do the reality check. What are the expectations and values, and what we can offer in the rural area. Sometimes the expectations and real life doesn't match here. Thank you.
Thank you for this reaction. Jana, you was talking about subsidizing areas, and also that this is something we're doing in rural area, that we like kind of giving possibility to towns to live their life like they want to do, isn't it? So now we should like also support rural life, but we ask reports of every penny you get to support. Is there any idea from your side or different ideas that how should it go? We cannot maybe just pay to everybody. There is ideas of like citizen fees or things, or maybe rural fees or things that maybe comment this idea in context of Estonia and Latvia, maybe not because full Europe and everything is like maybe too much.
This is one of the reasons that I feel we need to change that conversation, if you like, turn it around from what are the needs of the rural areas as a starting point to what makes urban areas sustainable. If we start thinking of that and you sort of look at the fact that the farmers are getting older, where is the food going to come from? It gets away from cost benefits analysis, if you like, to actually what do we need in the rural areas to help it to thrive, even from the basics of like a school, medical care. So when we start thinking of that, how can we make that happen? When we start asking those questions rather than, well, actually, you've only got 5 children, and that means that if, you know, amount per child, even with a bit of subsidy from rural areas, you still haven't got enough for a school. That's not good enough. We need to know how can we keep the farmers, the young farmers that we want to go into the rural areas, how can we keep them? What is needed? And then start from that point. So it's taking the point from a different place.
Mm-hmm. I catch here this question of farmers getting older and we don't have enough young people in countryside. Both to Kaire and Kai, maybe this question that how you can see the future for the young people, and is it so bad? Because in Estonia, if their old farmer like disappears, retired or passed away, there's still coming somebody young to take over. I also thinking about this question of free land, and if they want to go to the rural area, is there some kind of age and elderly people too much in rural area, and who are actually the actors who are working there? Some comments as from your side, I don't know, Kai, are you ready to answer to this? Yeah, because I know that you're going through different researches before you do your programming.
Yes. We have to believe that the future of young people is very good and positive. Luckily for us, our ministry with our social partners, we have put together agriculture, fisheries and rural life development plan and for year 2030. And our main vision is that Estonian food is valued and rural areas are a great place to live. But what is the key to unlock this situation, to unlock the rural development? This is the point, and we have like planned 8 big measures, and we have realized that sometimes it's not important to talk about young and old, and we just have to talk about active human beings and who want to come and develop the rural areas, livelihood and entrepreneurship. That's important, and we have to like support them to do their desired activities. That's my thought.
I commented the issue is actually even wider. It's not only a problem for farmers, but actually, at least in the case of Estonia, most people who live in the countryside, they don't own a farm and they also don't work in a farm. They work in some other sectors, or they are entrepreneurs in other sectors, and it's also a problem over there that we have a lot of this kind of old leadership, and it's definitely needed there as well to have either new leaders or new mindsets and new ways of building the business just to keep up with the time and the competition.
What I picked up from Joanna's article was a very nice sentence about the need to move from government to governance. And so to add to ministries, I would say that all those measures are very fine, but the people need to do things. People need to take responsibility of their communities, and there are ways of encouraging this. Of course, leader is one of them. I'm working for leaders, so I'm working because I really believe in it as a tool of activating communities. And the proximity of making decisions is very important. When I moved from Tallinn to Saar, the parish, I thought that all the little municipalities are really close to people. The Tallinn government I didn't really trust so much because it was always about politics. But then I moved there and I saw that it's the same thing. It still happens, and after the municipality reform it's even getting worse. The leaders are only fighting to each other, and all the decisions are made and then remade, and nothing good really happens. It's a lot of empty fussing around, I would say. There was a study that said that 5,000 people is the limit of feeling the proximity of the decisions. Like if you live in a local government that is less than 5,000, then you feel valued more. And if it's more, then it doesn't matter if the unit is 5,000 or 50,000, it's the same. So our municipality reform took the lowest number of inhabitants in the parish now is 5,000. So it has moved away from the emotional connection to the people, and that needs to be addressed by the communities themselves, I believe. And we cannot make or believe that the local government is the community. It's still a different thing.
Some years ago we made a demographic forecast for the municipalities, and even we are doing now the same work. In some municipalities there will be maybe 30% less people than now. It means that density in rural areas in some places will be more lower than now. And in this case, the question about the services. Where is the solutions how to solve the school network and other services, what you mentioned also. But other very important point for me is if we can talk about the aging of people who are dealing with rural firms, and did young generation want to do it the same way? And in some places you can see no. Maybe, let's say, after 20 years they understand that it's very nice to be back. But then the question about the land, who is owners of land? And I must point it very up, because in some countries, in Austria, you can't buy land. It's very, very difficult. And in Estonia now, it may be the last chance to buy a land, because if the land and people understand that it's not only as a thinking money you may use as you want in this way, that you can get money and money is going on, but the land is very important, and to be owner, and if you lost this land, and how to get back it. And if you can look the agriculture land, let's say 10 years ago, how was the price, and now it's, let's say, 3,800 euros per hectare. This time was, let's say, 800 euros. Not 800, yeah, euros. It means that if you can go out of this game, it's very difficult to go back to the rural life.
Yeah, Joanna, first I ask you, do you have some reflection of what you heard now? And then is also will be time for first question from audience. But first, Joanna, if you have something to say for this.
Well, first of all, community. What makes community? Earlier, you mentioned festivals, and the fact that there are so many festivals is important because that does cut across the different groups. So it's an important tie to the place. It also keeps the connection with those who do leave. So that's also useful. Maybe in time, you've been back to the festivals, you've been back to, maybe I'll actually go back and live there. So they are so important just to maintain the connection, but also to keep people meeting together. And if you can do that it's so valuable. And also just around food. Food is such a bringer together of people. Even if we create new festivals or whatever, around food is an excellent place to start. Also, when we're talking about governance and sort of bringing the government to the people, because we've got into this situation where so many have left, but there are, as you mentioned, people who want to move to the countryside but can't, we maybe need to include a wider group of people in that conversation. It's because we cannot just sort of assume, okay, what is it that stopped people going back? Jobs, yes. Schools, yes. But what is it? We can only really, really know when we start talking to the people. So it's like this group of people who maybe could help to repopulate the rural areas we need to be talking to and finding out what it is that would help them to come back to the countryside.
So, Kai
I also want to comment.
Yeah,
I agree with Rivo. This valuable agricultural land is a real important issue. Going back is really difficult. We have talked with the local people, and they say that if you want to do agriculture and food production, then you can't find any good land. You can buy a house, but without the land. But what do you do in a rural area with the house without the land? You can't grow your own vegetables and so on. That's a big issue and theme.
Thank you. I say also that my plans is that to stop in two main subjects. They are second is jobs, and then to go a little bit bureaucracy and trust, and also involve a leader there. But now I go to first question. I hope it's not too long, please.
Thank you. Dear Jana, thank you for a very nice topic, but excuse my Estonian English. I want to come back to Rivo, a question about connecting the community. I was elder of the village several years. Now I am involved in the leader program, North Harju local action group, and to strengthen the problem. As my understanding, we have three groups of people in our villages. First group is the people whose parents or grandparents are living in this village. Next group, some 30 years and newcomers. How to get those people to be connected, to do something together. I am organizing 12 times already one festival for mother-in-law, but if we have some 400 people in our village, only 100 are visiting this festival. Maybe you have some experiences about British community connection.
Maybe I comment why mother-in-law, because in their village is very old, ancient statue of mother-in-law, Iru Emma kuju, for Estonians audience. So that's why it's again connected. Your reaction to this question? And is anybody wants also to give some idea to Arno? But the question was directed to Joanna, you.
I'm not sure that the UK is a very good example. I think there are probably better examples. But again, coming back to food, sometimes that is the best way to connect people. When you sit around the table and eat together, has a different dynamic. One of the examples that really struck me was in Obernica, and you got the Seto community. And I was being told about these parties that they have, where they used to spend 3 days preparing and then 1 day actually doing the eating together, the party. And as people who are closed, 3 days preparing together actually opens up conversations and gives time and space to do that. So how, in today's society, do we facilitate that? I'm sorry, it's more questions. But, you know, they sort of, let's work together to produce a party, a food, where we sit around and we eat. But how do we, maybe it's in the preparation that's actually the value. And how do you incorporate people? If you announce something, sometimes, you know, people who you want to come will miss it. But if you go with a personal invitation, the little village that I mentioned, Kaldabruna in Latvia, they always make sure that everybody has a personal invitation. They will know, now, okay, there's only 100 people in there, so it's easier to get around. But 100 people actually is a good number. It might not feel like it, but there are 300 people who aren't coming. But actually, no, there are 100 people who came. And that is a very good number. I think if you were in the UK and you had a small village of 400 and 100 people were coming, you'd be pretty happy. So, as a perspective, you're doing well.
My only one comment is how to open the homes of people who are living there. It's the most important, because the social connection, it is the main line on what you can put other things. Mm-hmm. And the open days, I mean, I visited it this year, last year, and it's very fantastic. You can see the local people who, wow, what we are doing in our villages, what kind of entrepreneurs we have. And it's fantastic. And in this way, the most important in my side is how to have a connection between the people. If you can catch this connection, then you start to create something.
There is also the spatial planning. Remember, Ave, we were together in Udrumaa, in the Western Estonia this summer, where they have a community center, and the hostess explained that they designed the kitchen in the way that the table where you cut things is not along the walls, but in the middle.
Yeah.
So the whole village comes to prepare for the festival together, or any party, and they talk to each other. So
yeah.
That's just a little trick to use.
I bring here some more or like comments. Indeed, also this is for this nowadays problem that we don't visit each other, even if we are neighbors. We couldn't do it 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. There was very few telephones and so on, so we should communicate, like walking to visit our neighbors. Now we don't go. And you remember that it was very nice example from one village that they did open yards, open home days for themselves. They started with one corner of the village and visited everybody's yards and homes together. So, so you have to work today also to visit. Of course, it's not possible to every visit, so maybe Arno, you cannot do it, but try at least to some examples or something, so my advice as well. So, obvious is that everything, culture, jobs, and also specializing is changing. So to move on maybe about rural jobs. My question first to Rivo, but of course also to others to comment that and that is it at all bad or is it like normal development that the rural inhabitants number is shrinking? Somebody said it's because to find simple job in rural area, at least in Estonia, is more and more hard because agriculture will be more and more like specialized, well equipped, less jobs, more need for specialists. So who is not so capable to create themselves like job, they should move to town, even if they are maybe good education, but not everybody for as an entrepreneur. Of course, here is nice that the possibilities for distant work. This is, I think that Estonia is quite okay because our distances are not so big. So this kind of job issue, I start with Rivo, but also I ask others to comment from their perspective these questions.
My answer is starting from the point of geography. To have a center and center hinterland. And in Estonian regional policy, we must keep some centers. Maybe in Estonia, we can calculate it 50, 60 centers. And the background of these centers, it must be quite good organized. And it gives a possibility to have in centers services, but not able in center background. But on the other hand, it gives opportunity to have different jobs. I mean, on countryside, it's very, very difficult to have a full-time work. As you mentioned also that there is a seasonal reasons and different things. But how to combine work in the small cities with rural life. And I mean in this way that's a small enterprise to have maybe 10 rabbits in rural and to have, let's say, 4 days full-time in the city and to combine such life and also combine the work life. It is my, let's say, understanding how to solve the question, because otherwise, if you can see how many people are working now in agriculture, it's less than 2%, and there is no moving back. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can do with soft agriculture something, but principally this time is lost in my understanding.
Mm-hmm. I think rural entrepreneurship diversification that's why very important. If we talk about farm, then off-farm jobs and activities are also really important. And like I said previous, we need to think or find innovative solutions, how to add value to our products, how to market them, how to export them. That's also important. And how to create attractive jobs in rural area. This is a big issue for us. If there were an easy solution, it's like, it would be done, yes. But we have thought that maybe we have previous years supported micro-enterprises, but we have thought maybe we support give knowledge to micro-enterprises and support more medium-sized enterprises, because the analysts have said that medium enterprises, if you support them and they develop a little bigger, they are the most they can offer more jobs in rural areas than micros. And maybe there is a thought.
A few weeks back there was a seminar from Estonian Foresight Center. It was about scenarios of regional economy in Estonia, the future scenarios. And there was also a panel discussion, and then one thing that came out of this panel discussion was that for the people who are active and they're educated, they can make a living no matter what the scenario will be in the future. But for those who lack the skills, who lack the education, it's going to be tough no matter what. So yeah, it is difficult to find jobs if you don't have the qualifications. So yeah, and I think we have to look at the people, the skills, and we have to think about the people who live in the rural areas now. I think sometimes it's a tendency to imagine that if we do this and this, then we will get new families who have lots of children, who are very educated, have this entrepreneurial mindset, want to start companies with lots of jobs. You know, it's kind of like unicorns. You have such people as well, but they're like very few, actually. So most of the people you can count on are actually the people who live in the area at the moment. So you have to look at them. Do they have the skills? Do they have the habit to work? Do they have like this entrepreneurial mindset? So you have to actually look at this. You know, if you talk about people and if you talk about workforce, you have to look, in my opinion, you have to look at the people who are there today. And this is where you have to also plan for the actions, and you have to plan for the trainings and so on.
Yeah, but if you can look at Estonian cases, in some cases, if we can talk about the entrepreneurship or new firms, they hate it. Not in my backyard. Do it somewhere, but not in here. Now, for example, we have many cases in Estonia now where the huge amount of places, working places, lost because the people who moved to the countryside, they have ideas that it's a quiet place, it's very my place, and then here will be some newcomers with entrepreneurs. No, I hate it. And it's also very difficult to change that behavior, because privacy is very important in countryside. And I believe that if I go to the countryside, I want to have a private life, because it was in my mind. And in this case, it's very important who will move to the countryside. They must understand that there is some differences between the urban life. And you must accept. If you are sitting in Ireland, you must accept that transportation is not 100% covered. Otherwise, you are opposite inside you, and you are in conflict, and it's not nice.
Yeah, I mean, these are the issues, sort of trying to balance all these different, like you said, expectations. To give an example, a UK example, as a friend of mine was a counsellor, and there was a complaint about the cockerel crowing in the village. It shouldn't happen here. It's like, it's a village. That's what you expect. You know, there are cockerels in the village. They make a noise at whatever time in the morning. And it was just such a shock to these people. But again, there's less knowledge of what actually happens in rural areas, I think, in the UK. But one of the other things that occurs to me is this, the centres. How about hubs instead of centres? When I did my master's, I was with the University of the Highlands and Islands. They have no centre. They have hubs in different places. So their lecturers and the people in those sorts of jobs are in different places. So one of mine was on the Isle. My supervisor was on the Isle of Lewis, but I also had other people from like Inverness, the Orkneys, all over, and they were rooted in their own places. And this was a deliberate, policy that they would they would be in different places. So they weren't in just Perth or in Inverness, where you would expect them. So they can contribute their own sort of values and tax money, which is usually a very big thing. And also social working, because the entrepreneurs, we tend to think, oh, well, they will develop their business, etc. But isolation is again a problem. Can we not combine schools, education, and social working places within villages? Is it possible? That's just a...
Yeah. First, I ask also Triinu for this about job. Do you want also to reflect to this question, because it's also your personal activity or life there?
Self-employment.
As an entrepreneur, I would say that I would hire anybody tomorrow if there was a person. Really, if you say that there are no jobs, I have to add that there are no people to employ. Mm-hmm. This is reciprocal. What Kaira said sounded very well, that you have to start from the people who are already there, and or they are about to move there. They look around for opportunities, and maybe they are really what are called lifestyle enterprises. In Estonia, it sounds elustiili ettevõte sounds a bit deprecating, I would say, because they are not big businessmen. They are making living only for themselves, but in the countryside, it's the most wisest way at the moment, because just there is nobody to hire.
Kai,
yes, I wanted to add some thoughts. Rivo said community. I think we have to learn how to communicate with local people, like Joanna said, talk to the people. Like, we know how to do business. It's easy to start business, but we have to sell why we want to do that in their place, the local. We have to talk with local people. They have to understand why it's necessary and what is added value for them. I think this is important, the communication.
Also, I want to add one thing. It's generations are changing, and the mind in generation are changing. And if I look my life from the childhood, it was very important to work. All time I remember in my family and in also with our neighbors, work was on the first place. Now, there is no any more work on the first place. The life is in the first place, and the work is one part of life. And it is very important to understand, and if you want to connect with generation by generation, the entrepreneurship or the living in countryside, we can see the other thing also. In your life, you have different interests. Depends in which year it happens. The first, after the graduate of secondary school or gymnasium, you want to see a little bit more life. There is no any connection that you are automatically go to the to the university after the gymnasium. No. I looked in the Lääne-Viru county, 40% of people who finished the gymnasium, they don't continue education life. And it's very important also to see such kind of changes in our life and don't put them in traditional way to solve your own life questions.
We going on to the final topics I want to ask, but before that, Joanna, do you have some reflections here, or you said more or less? Hear you.
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
whatever. I ask now, this like section is about bureaucracy and maybe trust and also leader. I start with Triinu, but my thoughts is I have also worked in ministry sometimes, and now it's working for rural network unit. Was this like a lighter, not so strong administrative work, but still. And but this is like very common that ministry people from ministry and everybody I know, they are very nice persons and they are working really hard to make life better. In our case, countryside and regions. The other side, still, the people said government is far from us, local government is far, they don't talk to us, they are don't listen to us, they don't bring jobs to countryside and so on. So here is now this leader or CLLD, how much this method can bring people closer to decision making, and also is it good tool and this history here, and what should we do also with these issues, and also for first for your side, but also from ministry side. In Estonia, it's the situation is not too bad or too far, or our public sector is quite available for people actually. But okay, let's start comments.
Again, I will start from myself. When I moved to a place where I didn't have any relatives, I don't. My family is not from the same area. I moved to a completely different place. The only way I met new people, I got new relationships, was through leader group, because they organized all kinds of courses, they brought people together. I met local entrepreneurs and also local government. The people there are very nice when they are outside of their office. So everybody was there with the intention to make the region better, and they work for the common cause. And the bureaucracy, I think to some extent it's necessary, because we all want the public money to be used wisely. And of course there are some people who want to benefit, and we have to prevent it some way. But there are also very strong advisory tugi. Support from the leader group, so everybody gets, I think, the support always.
I ask Kaire maybe, or because we almost know what the Ministry of Rural Affairs thoughts about leader, but we are very keen to know also what the other ministries think about us.
I definitely don't know as much details as as Kai are trained to, especially when it comes to bureaucracy, which was the question, I guess. So, or trust also.
All this is big. Yeah. All answers are good.
But yeah, so it's maybe a bit difficult to comment on that. Yeah, I guess from our office's point of view, it's always a question that, like, if we want to achieve some kind of change, so whose responsibilities? A lot of the things that we are dealing with is something that is given as a responsibility for the municipality when it comes to either services or so on. So it's a lot of the things are something that the municipality should do, that they are elected for. So yeah, and then of course in other policy areas there are a lot of the activities that the success depends on the community, and I think this is something that is more and more discussed in the ministries as well. Is what are the kind of policies that we can involve communities more, and this is where the leader might come in.
Yeah, maybe my question or comments was very far. So shortly to say this question is that how much leader method can reduce this misunderstanding between public sector and local people. This maybe the word does. But Kai, you are anyway ready to comment this issue.
Yes, like Joanna said, like policy, programming and financing are very important. In Estonia, we have regional programs. We have also rural development program through which we have this community-led local development measure. We have like 26 local action groups. And I believe that European Fund for Agriculture and Rural Development is really close to the communities, and if we think about this community-led local development mechanisms, there are like three sides: municipalities, civil society, and also entrepreneurs. And these are just like our hubs in Estonia, I think. And I think we have to like develop this kind of mechanism. Also, there are some problems. They have to like be also like have a little bureaucracy, because they have to like prove that they achieve some kind of progress with this money. And there are plus sides, also negative sides, and I think we have to like go further and develop this system and go further to other policies with this community-led local development.
Thank you.
I can say that my point of view first is trust yourself. It's the most important. If you don't trust yourself, then it's other things not working so much. And what I think about the situation and with leader, I think it's a very fantastic way to support the communities. But on the other hand, what I can see in Estonia, it's very funny that we can collect money from the people to the top. And what I can see is that if you want to do something, your resources is out of your hands, and then you must take all-time applications. Huge amount of applications that I want to do this and this and this, and you must ask for somebody. And it's going, in my understanding, very fast now. And I hate it. If you don't have a chance to do by yourself and to ask the people who have interest to join with me to do something, I think it's the most important way to achieve something what you really want to have. And the same as local municipalities. We can talk about the financial autonomy. Local municipalities have earned yourself 3.5% of budget. Other money is coming from central government. And then I ask, are you autonomy? My question is no, you are not autonomy. And if still such situation will be continued, then everybody looking up. Why they don't give me money? Why they don't give me support? But it's not sustainable way to go away in this situation.
So I know that Kai, you will have very little time. Do you have some time for some comment, or can I ask somebody if they have a question to you from audience, or should you go? At least you can comment, and if you feel free to leave us, we can hold some extra 5 minutes, but not more.
I think I have already said all my thoughts.
Thank you. Then I turn again to Joanna to sum up a little bit, and then maybe some final thoughts for our audience. And do I see some question from audience? No, there was quite. You have one question. I come to you with microphone.
Thank you. Could you please specify what is this 3.7% about the content?
If you can take the budget of local municipalities and you can look how the municipality budget is formed. The local taxes, we have 6 taxes. Most they are not used. It means that if you can look the income tax, it's divided from the central budget. If you can look the land tax, it's divided from the central budget. Everything is, not everything, but as I mentioned, the amount what you can earn yourself on the municipal level, it's so slow, so small part of. And in this case, are you independent?
Well, not, but my question was, what makes this 3.7%?
Percent of the municipal budget. It local taxes.
All right.
So, Joanna, your reflections on this part of discussion.
I see the problem with the bureaucracy comes down to relationships. And there's plenty of money for projects or buildings or things, something tangible. But there's not much money for building these social networks and building these relationships, building the social capacity of villages to do something. And sometimes that's partly relying on meetings and groups, meetings. That isn't the way to get people together, as we've talked about before. It's sort of like revolving around food. Food helps us to come together, to develop relationships. How do we actually fund that? And one other thing to suggest is actually using artists and storytellers to enable conversations to be developed. Instead of relying on meetings, can we use these artists and storytellers to start generating more relationships, more conversations? So, yeah.
So, we came almost to the end. I give final floor to final comments. Today was not like another info day or not a problem solving, all problem solving, just was more or less discussion around. So, Rivo, Triin and Kaire, also your final comment for today.
I think it was a nice presentation, and on the presentation was put out many questions. And as I'm a practical guy, I want to have solutions also.
Again, we tend to reproduce the presuppositions a lot about these rural people as agriculture, and that we again mentioned today so many times. It's very good that we discuss these things, and I hope that we will gradually understand rural in a novel way.
Well, for me, one thing to think about further is that responsibility, like who takes responsibility for the rural development? Should it be ministry? Should it be the local municipality? Should it be the community? And if it's municipality of community, then how can they really take this responsibility? So what do they need? Do they have all the tools? So what needs to change? And it's probably not just finances. There must be something else as well, I think.
Yes, but I think we must talk about the multi-level governance. And it's in very small part of this multi-level governance exists in Estonian society, I must say.
So thank you for this time. So applause. We have something very small here. Something very small. So Esther, come here to assist me to give what we have. So applause. Yeah. See on ju Annale. Anna. Nii. First Johanna. Johanna.
Thank you. Thank you.
And here is, you know what it is. It's 100 year of Estonia. Yeah. It was last year. So, and you will get... Nii, päris kõiki värve kõigile ei saa. Ma tean, Triinu, et sul on juba. Päris vahele ei saa sind ikka jätta. Nii, suur tänu teile. Nii, ja oota, see linkikott on ka meil, eks ole veel. Siis saab Kairele see linkikott ka. Selline üritus oli meil. Suur tänu.
Yeah, I have
Nii, me lõpetame. Suur tänu ja sellega me lõpetame. Ja suur aplaus meie tõlgile, keda